Hello, my name is Evan, and today, in the form of a virtual field trip, we will be taking a deeper look into the Irish potato famine, which was the main topic of my book, Black Potatoes. Black Potatoes by Susan Campbell Bartolone is a literary nonfiction book that takes place in Ireland in the years between 1845 and 1850 and is about the Irish potato famine. The Irish potato famine occurred in the 1800s when the Irish relied heavily on the potatoes and ate them for every meal. During this time, they could not go to the store, so they grew everything themselves and had to harvest potatoes twice a year, and one harvest had to last them 6 months until the next harvest. In 1845, one night while the farmers were sleeping, a heavy dark fog rolled into the fields, and the farmers knew something was wrong. So the next day, they went to check their potatoes, and they were all rotten. Every single one of them. This mysterious blight continued on for the next 5 years. Good news is that the blight became weaker over time and did not impact all the potatoes after the first year, but there was still not enough to feed everyone. During the famine years, over 2 million people either starved to death, died of disease, or immigrated to the Canada or US. As you take a look at the map, you can start to understand where Ireland is relative to the rest of the world. This thing. Ireland is an island located off the coast of the UK. Alright, the first stop on our tour is the Skibbereen Heritage Museum. Skibbereen is one of the southern parts of Ireland and had a 1/3 death rate, which makes it one of the hardest hit towns by the famine. The main attraction of this museum is called the Great Irish Famine Exhibition. This museum has significance because it shares stories of how much some people in the town struggle to survive. This stop has correlation with the book Black Potatoes because most of the horrific stories from the book came from the people of Skibbereen. The stories of families huddled up in the corner of their hut and visitors not being able to tell if they were dead or alive. The people that were just skeletons walking the streets begging for food, and how there were just dead bodies lining the roads from people who had been going around begging and died on the spot from starvation or disease. Alright, the next less gruesome spot on our tour is the National Famine Museum in Roscommon, Ireland. The main attraction of this stop is to see the collection of photos, documents, exhibits, which is the largest collection pertaining to the potato blight in the whole country. Another cool part about this stop is how it shows the battle between the landlords and the people who rented the land, the farmers. And also, the building that the museum is in is a restored mansion that was once lived in by one of the wealthy landlords. This relates to the book Black Potatoes because the battle between the landlords and the workers was talked about throughout the whole story. And the rivalry was sometimes so fierce that the workers would kill their landlords. It also relates because in order to pay their rent, the Irish workers would grow wheat, which would flourish when the potato failed. But instead of eating the wheat they had grown, they had to give it to pay their landlord, therefore leaving them with no food. The next stop is the National Leprechaun Museum, which is in Dublin, the capital of Ireland. The National Leprechaun Museum is about the history of leprechauns and fairies in Ireland. The main reason this is one of the stops on the tour is because Irish folklore often involves leprechauns and fairies. This museum does a great job of explaining this through a string of interactive exhibits, the belief of leprechauns and fairies. This relates to the book Black Potatoes because most people believed that the reason for the blight was because the fairy clans were battling over the potatoes. The fourth stop, the fourth stop on our trip is a relatively short one at the Famine Memorial and is located in Dublin. The Famine Memorial is a group of statues of people during the famine years. As a viewer can see, the people are suffering are basically skin and bones walking around in baggy, ripped clothing. Some of the statues are carrying items, which could be their belongings or possibly sick or deceased children. This memorial is truly heartbreaking and gives you an idea of how people looked during the years of the potato blight. The statues are located at Dublin Docklands and were given to the city in 1997. This memorial relates to the book Black Potatoes because it gives people an image of what the people looked like during the famine years. Excuse me. The next stop on the list is in Dublin and is the Irish Immigration Museum. This museum explains the impact that the immigration of Irish citizens had on the rest of the world. Immigrants impacted music, literature, sports, politics, fashion, and science wherever they went. The coolest part about this museum is that it is the world's first and only digital museum featuring over 1,500 years of Irish history. The Irish Immigration Museum has correlation to the book Black Potatoes because in the book one of the biggest chapters is fully devoted to how and why the Irish left their home country in order to go to the US and Canada to secure a better life and get away from the blight. Another stop on our tour is the Irish Workhouse Centre, which is in Galway, Ireland, and is one of the 163 workhouses that operate in Ireland. This particular workhouse has recently been renovated, though. A workhouse is basically a volunteer prison where people do hard labor and other various strenuous jobs in order to get a place to sleep and some food. But workhouses, or sometimes called poorhouses, were truly horrible places to be. In workhouses, disease spread like wildfire and killed many. Second, most of the workhouses were overcrowded to the point where people were forced to sleep on the floor and sometimes given no food. And finally, you could not leave whenever you wanted. This applies to Black Potatoes because some of the characters in the book were so desperate for food they would try to break into the workhouse to survive. These workhouses were so overcrowded that sometimes they wouldn't let them in. The next stop on the trip is a guided tour through a famine graveyard and workhouse. Like the previous stop, this one is also a workhouse, but instead this workhouse is not restored, and guided tours take visitors through the crumbling buildings after the workhouse tour. After the workhouse tour, visitors tour the graveyard where all the people that died in the workhouse were buried in their individual graves. This burial practice was unique since most workhouses buried their dead in mass graves one on top of another. This stop correlates to Black Potatoes because in the book they told stories of how sometimes that people were still alive when they were thrown into the grave pits accidentally. The next stop on our tour is the Old Irish Ways Museum in Limerock, Ireland. The reason this point is on our tour is because it offers artifacts and collectibles from all different time periods from all over Ireland. One interesting thing is about this museum is that it gives visitors a look into people's day-to-day life. This museum displays artifacts that can set visitors back all the way in time to the 18th century, like how they have 18th century set up kitchens, tumbler dryers, boilers, and radiators. Recreations uh, Recreations also include an old pub, a creamery, a classroom, a blacksmith's forge, and a carpenter's workshop. This book relates to Black Potatoes because it gives a look back into everyday life for the 18th century Irish and how they lived. Another stop on our tour is Derry Glen Folk and Heritage Museum, which is located in Athlone, Ireland. One of the most interesting things about Derry Glen Folk and Heritage Museum is that their collection of 1800s farm equipment, which includes horse-drawn machinery like plowing tools and tradesman tools and buttermaking equipment, all of which is in fully working and functioning order. They also have things from modern times, like 1930s cameras and a very large collection of 78 RPM records. This museum relates to the book Black Potatoes because it has a wide variety of functioning farm equipment that the Irish use so visitors can see exactly how it works. The next stop on the tour is Cavan County Museum, which is located in Cavan, Ireland. In this museum, there are two exhibits that relate to the potato famine. The first of two is the Great Famine exhibit, in which visitors can see authentic items from the potato famine, years such as shoes found in a famine graveyard along with a pot from the famine years. Another thing in this exhibit is a replica of what Irish workers' cottage would have looked like during the famine years. The second exhibit pertaining to the famine, surprisingly enough, is a hurling exhibit. The reason this seemingly odd exhibit is included in the tour is because during the famine years, one of the favorite sports of the Irish was hurling. These exhibits relate to the book Black Potatoes because it gives because of the famine exhibits like the replica cabin, and because it has a hurling exhibit, which was one of the Irish's favorite pastimes during the famine years. The last and final stop on our tour is the War House in Tipperary, Ireland, or otherwise known as the McCormick's House. During the famine, the Irish got fed up with how the British had been treating them and how they had been giving them no help during the famine years, so they started a rebellion. Eventually, after they gained about 200 men, they set up in the town of Tipperary because they knew that some British troops would come through later. And when they did, they attacked the British troops, who retreated to Mrs. McCormick's house while she was gone and had left her children home alone. The British took over the house and fought it out with the rebels until both sides declared peace. This relates to the book Black Potatoes because the author devotes a whole chapter to the beginning of the short rebellion that was fought at Mrs. McCormick's house. Alright, so here are all the picture citations that I used to create all of the pictures in in the slides. There's 1 page, 2 page, then here is all the works cited that I used to create the script. Alright, have a great day.